Emily, Jennifer, Sarah, James, and Mark were all pretty excited when they decided to go to an abandoned campsite in the northeastern United States. They wanted to get away from the chaos of the modern world and spend a quiet weekend in nature. Traveling throughout the day, they made their way deep into a large forest. They sang songs on the road, shared old memories with laughter, but there was a warning in the background. The campsite had been abandoned for many years, and the fact that no one lived nearby seemed to make sense. But despite this, nothing stopped them. As they approached the campsite, the trees began to grow denser with each passing minute. The forest was so dense that sunlight could only reach the earth intermittently. The trunks of the trees were blackened, the leaves were yellow and dried. The forest looked like it had been neglected for many years. With nowhere else to go, they managed to reach the old campsite by the river. The surroundings of the campsite stood abandoned and darkened. But something was missing. Everything seemed to have been deliberately pushed back, forgotten. Still, they began to set up their tents. At first, everything was normal, but there was unrest. The wind suddenly picked up, the trees started hitting each other, and howling sounds rose from the forest. Emily thought these sounds meant something, but his friends ignored it and decided not to hang around too much. They lit the campfire and started telling old horror stories to each other around it. Meanwhile, Emily paused for a moment. He saw movement in the bushes just outside their tent. Even though he looked quickly, he couldn't see anything. He felt a wave of fear inside him. "These are just signs of seeing ghosts," she smiled to herself, but she couldn't hide the fear inside her. Jennifer said, "There was really something, Emily. I can feel it," he said. There was panic in his eyes. Emily smiled and tried to calm him down by saying, "It's just the wind." But deep down, she had a feeling something was very different. As the night progressed, the howling of the wind and strange sounds coming from the forest made the night even scarier. The weather was getting colder and everyone felt uneasy, but no one expressed it. In the middle of the night, Emily woke up suddenly. The air was thickly silent, but this silence made one feel that something was approaching. He heard a deep whisper. The sound was coming from a different point every moment in the darkness outside. "You will find me," he said, but it was impossible to make out who he was. The voice had become strangely melodic and menacing, each word inspiring more fear than the others. Emily rubbed her eyes and took a deep breath. "It's just the wind," she tried to calm herself, but her heart was already beating rapidly. She headed straight for Jennifer's tent. Jennifer woke up, shivering. "Emily, there was something coming towards me. I can feel it," she said, her voice filled with fear. "Jennifer, no one's here. You're just dreaming," Emily said. But she felt the fear inside her too. She knew something was wrong. They had to spend the night. It had become impossible. The sounds around them had begun to increase in a way that made them tremble. They lay quietly for a while and tried to listen, but this silence made them feel like something was approaching them in the forest. And suddenly, Emily's ears were startled by a rustling sound coming from outside, a slow but distinct sound coming from the bushes outside the tent. It was different from the sound she had heard before. It was coming towards them slowly, step by step. Emily wanted to look outside, trembling, but there was nothing outside. But everything was different. At that moment, Emily clearly felt that something was watching them. In the morning, the campsite was quiet. The howling wind and strange sounds coming from deep in the forest left a chilling feeling throughout the night. When Emily, Jennifer, and the others opened their eyes, they immediately realized something was wrong. The fact that their belongings were missing made it seem like someone or something had messed up their camp during the night. Jennifer's phone was missing, the small table at the edge of the tent, an old cell phone cord, and a few scattered clothes. Sarah's backpack was missing, and James's cooking supplies had suddenly disappeared. The group, who couldn't find their belongings, looked at each other and couldn't figure out what had happened. "Nobody came in here, did they?" Jennifer asked, her eyes blazing with panic. She clasped her hands together and looked around fearfully. Outside, the forest looked even darker in the early morning light. "No, nobody's here. But nothing can disappear that soon," Emily said. She tried to hide her fear, but it felt like something was watching them. They were aware that everything had changed since they had fallen asleep just a few hours ago. The wind was still not letting up. Looking into each other's eyes, they began to discuss these strange disappearances. Could these just be the sounds of the wind, or just a coincidence? Emily thought. But the more she thought about it, the more fear slowly began to envelop her like a wave. Those humming sounds coming from the depths of the forest reached her ears once more. "We have to find our things," Emily added. She had a feeling that these missing things had a meaning, that something was after them, that its eyes were watching them. But what? Emily and her friends decided to step into the depths of the forest to search for their lost items. As scary as it was to have to spend the night, they also had to follow up on what they saw when they woke up in the morning. The trees and the spaces between them had become denser and denser, and the air had become colder and colder. The nature around them was like a trap. Everything was drawing them in. As time went by, the weather started to get darker. With the darkening weather, everything in the forest seemed even scarier. There was a strange silence. As they slowly walked, Emily noticed that the wind had started to howl like a whisper. Suddenly, they started to hear voices. Their eyes had darkened, and the surroundings had become even more gloomy and threatening. The trees stood tall behind them like a being watching them. They all stopped for a moment and looked around carefully. But there was nothing. They continued to walk slowly. After a while, as they got farther away from their campsite, they felt like they were walking towards something lost in the depths of the forest. As they moved deeper into the forest, Emily's heart was beating faster and faster. Looking into each other's eyes, they didn't seem to want to go any further, but each of them took another step, trying to overcome the fear inside them. They didn't want to stay in this forest, where they were mentally scattered and everything seemed like a trap ready to fall at any moment. But somehow, finding the lost items could be a solution to this terrible feeling they were experiencing. The trees had started to surround them, moving away from them. The path became narrower and narrower, and the temperature gradually dropped. They took another step, but now everything was much darker. The humming sounds coming from the depths of the forest were becoming increasingly intense and frightening. Strange, old sounds were echoing around them. After a deep silence, a humming sound rose again. These sounds coming from the surroundings were constantly returning to them like an echo. The fear inside Emily grew even more. "There's something here," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "I can feel it." "There's no one," Emily said, trying to hide her fear. However, with each passing minute, she felt the forest getting darker. They walked slowly, and suddenly they came across the ruins of an abandoned stone structure. The inside of the structure was chillingly cold. The stones were abandoned, as if they hadn't been touched by anyone for many years. The old stones leaning against the broken walls seemed to bear traces of the past. The building may have once been a village or a shelter of some kind, but now it was just a forgotten place. It had once been home to people, but now it was just an abandoned ruin. They went inside. The air inside was not fresh. It was stuffy and smelled of damp. On the old walls were strange writings written in blood. There was a deep writing that said, "You will find me." Jennifer suddenly fainted when she read this writing on the wall. Her friends approached her in fear, trying to understand the meaning of everything. These writings showed that the spirits of those who once lived in these places were still waiting for something here. "What does this mean?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Her whole body was filled with fear and tension. At that moment, a sound was heard from outside, a deep, groaning rustle. It was as if something, a shadow, was approaching them from outside the building. They did not dare to look outside, but they decided to leave as soon as possible. But the moment they stepped outside the building, they felt something was wrong. The shadows seemed to be following them. Suddenly, Jennifer disappeared. They searched for her with their eyes, but they could not see anyone. They shouted, "Jennifer!" but there was no answer. The whole group panicked and started searching the rocks by the river, but they could not find any trace of Jennifer. At that moment, Emily's heart began to beat faster. The forest was drawing them in more and more with each passing moment. They could clearly feel that something was watching them, and they thought that they would disappear one by one. As they moved deeper into the forest, Emily's fear grew. Even though they had gone all the way to the edge of the river, they could not find any trace of Jennifer. The trees surrounded them with each step, becoming denser and more threatening. The forest, which had once seemed like a comforting place, was now strangely beginning to surround and envelop them. The air was becoming colder and denser with each passing second. Emily felt a frightening and different silence that she had never noticed before. The whole surroundings, except for the flowing water of the river, were immersed in a deep silence. Suddenly, a thin whispering sound hit her ears. Everyone stopped. The silence between them made it seem like something was approaching. Emily looked around in fear, but she could not see anyone. At that moment, another scream was heard. They jumped up in fear and panic. The sound came from the rocks at the edge of the river. "Jennifer!" they shouted, but there was no answer. Emily felt like a ghost. A spirit was watching them. There was a strange uneasiness around her, a feeling that something was not right. The whispers were like the voices of lost souls somewhere. "Don't leave us here," she heard a voice shout. It was so loud that it blew Emily's mind. Something wanted to keep them here. Her eyes had darkened, her body had stiffened. Her friends were struggling around her, on the rocks by the river, in the hope of finding Jennifer. But everything was becoming increasingly frightening. The air felt as if it had momentarily slipped into another dimension. They could see something moving around them, but they could not see anyone. A deep uneasiness and fear gripped them. Something was waiting around every corner. From the depths of the forest, the roar of lost souls was growing louder. Suddenly, a figure appeared. His silhouette had darkened. He looked like a tall man, but his face had disappeared. Emily drew back in terror, but the figure took another step. This man was like a ghost. His face was blurred, his eyes were empty. He was one of the souls who had been lost in the forest for decades. As that figure approached them, the distance between them was gradually shortening. Emily was trembling inside, but she could not move. The silhouette of that darkened figure was growing before her eyes. "What do you want from us?" Emily shouted. But she did not receive an answer. The figure took another step forward, so close that Emily could almost feel it. Suddenly, she felt something closing in on her body, a dark force beginning to envelop her and pull her. As her friends quickly ran back, Emily and the figure's eyes met. It was a deep, frozen gaze. Emily felt as if she had been pulled out of her soul. As they ran back, they sank deeper into the forest. Each step they took was pushing them toward a dark rock. Emily continued to run quickly, lost in fear. The darkness of the forest had enveloped her body. Every tree, every stone, every bush was like a trap. There was no way out now. Everything around her was closing in on them. Her eyes had darkened, her heart was beating rapidly. She could feel something approaching her in her head. Suddenly she tripped and fell. As if she were stuck to the ground, she could not prevent everything from collapsing on her head. As she slowly raised her head, a strange light appeared before her eyes. That light was like the reflection of a ghost. Emily's eyes were almost blind in the darkness, but that light was approaching her. It was the reflection of a spirit, the presence of a ghost of someone lost. She rubbed her eyes, but the light grew even larger. Taking a deep breath, she moved towards the light, but the rocks on the river's edge had dispersed. As the weather grew darker, everything seemed more terrifying. The writings on the wall in blood were like clues that the spirits would never let anyone go. "You will stay here forever," it said. Emily shivered. This place had become a prison, a trap. Everything had been arranged to take Emily's soul. A lost face appeared right next to where the light came from. The face was snowy, pale, and its eyes were deep voids. Emily wanted to retreat in fear, but everything had gone black. Suddenly, everything disappeared. Everything had been drawn into a dark void. She closed her eyes and heard a scream. That scream was Jennifer's scream, but that scream was like a scream lost inside Emily. When Emily raised her head, everything seemed to have disappeared. Now the forest was filled with the calls of lost souls. Her eyes were smoggy. Everything seemed lost. She took another step slowly and was dragged deeper into the forest. With each step, the forest was drawing her in. Fear was like a weight accumulating in every cell. Her insides were surrounded by dark souls. "You will find me," said that deep, dark voice. In an instant, she came across a wall. There was nothing around her. Everything was like a lost nightmare. Dark figures and ghosts were circling around her. Another silhouette appeared, slowly approaching, saying, "You will find me." That silhouette symbolized a lost soul from the past, and now Emily's soul would share the same fate. They were approaching her. At that moment, she felt that everything was over. That spirit that combined all fears, was approaching to pull Emily into its dark world. The entire forest began to slowly disappear, rotating around her. Everything around her was rotten and lost. And then, for a moment, everything was gone. Emily's end was awaited in this dark forest. One of those lost souls had been drawn into the depths of the forest. All the souls had come together and taken her,